Morning, Dr. R. Michael Fisher here, Fearologist, educator, artist, naturalist, thinker about the nature of human behavior in as many different ways as I can, a transdisciplinary thinker and thought. Today is what I want to share. I want to share that we have a big blind spot as domesticated humans, which I am, and perhaps no doubt you are if you're listening, but maybe not. But for most of us, we're domesticated under at least 10,000 years of agriculture and horticulture into urban civilization and societies, so-called the civilized. And yeah, we've been around for a long time thinking that early peoples, so-called stone peoples, cavemen peoples, all kinds of names and labels that we moderns like to put, even our scientists like to put on the ancient ones. And not just humans for sure, but that's who we're going to talk about today. But there's also our many primary ancestors that are much older and more wise than even humans, perhaps. Not an argument I'm going to go into today, but what I wanted to talk about today is obviously sitting here in front of my eyes, because this is the problem of fear projection. I entered this whole In Search of Fearlessness project in 1989 because of my concern about the fear project. In other words, fear projection as this huge defense system that's built into our brain skulls and seems to want to continually inform everything that we think and do. And it's a problem. Time to be cut and time to be recognized for what it is, this danger signaling that is often in the most common phrase we'll hear about understanding the nature, the core of human beings. Anybody who's doing research on has repeated this phrase, and the populace has repeated this phrase. Humans are susceptible to flight, fight reactions, or fight, flight. And that's the fear reaction, right? And then we go into a long discourse, or sometimes a short discourse in a book or a guide or a teacher, somebody who's going to give us some self-help, and they are going to tell us that if you can learn to manage fear, the fight, flight response, then you're much more likely to be, able to not just survive, but even to thrive. So, but the problem with the projection is that us moderns who are raised in domesticated cages of fenced, housed boxes for so long in our so-called civilized world, we've become so afraid of the danger out there, beyond the fence, beyond the cage that we built for ourselves, to become domesticated meat puppets, as my terror management friend, colleague Sheldon Solomon says. That we then, when we look at the past, we say, oh, look at those primitive human beings, anthropologists or human behaviorists, and they were on survival mode. This is the story. This is the not good story. I think the inaccurate story. As Tyson Yunkaporta says and speaks about from an Indigenous perspective, it's a story that has twisted so much of our thinking to think that we're continually fear-based creatures operating on this fight mechanism. And so our projection will tell the story of our human ancestors in these, let's just say the caveman, for popular use of the term. They're walking around, this is how the story goes, and they're just waiting, always hyper alert, on guard, because, right, the danger signal idea is still carrying our story about them and how they live, and that a saber-toothed tiger could come, poisonous snake, blah, blah, blah. And so they have to have this in our brain. And we even have a story about how it works in our brain and our neurobiology, very sophisticated analysis of the flight, fight mechanisms and so on. Now, I'm not saying today that those don't exist, but are they in any way central to our survival and our ability to survive, and thus have been such a core part of our evolution? A lot of people tell that story. Oh, yeah, a lot of us. And I've been caught in that story too, somewhat. Although in my study of fear, I always was questioning, is fear the right word for the ordinary alertness that primal beings, our ancestors, natural organisms have? And are we fear projecting? So that was, again, that problematique that I raised at the beginning of this video. Are we projecting our danger? That's just because we've been raised in this very domesticated world, and we're carrying that lens of danger everywhere because, once we step outside of our pen or our locked doors and so on, especially when we go into natural environments, but not just when we go into strange environments, we danger signal, and we believe that this is the true story, that humans are, in survival mode. So our ancestors must have been too. In fact, that's where we inherited, but they're so primitive, so-called, and we're just in fight and flight and didn't have a lot of variation and nuance on that as their central motivator. So I've been thinking about it and listening to, as I say, Tyson Yunkaporta. I'll put his name down and you can listen to one of his links or talks or a book that he's got recently on Sand Talk. He really turns this notion upside down, and quite bluntly, he says the fight, flight response idea is bullshit. It is the wrong story for humans and humanity. And I've just given you a few reasons why, because we are the caged ones projecting that our fear onto our ancestors. So he tells a story, and not just a story, he tells of his life growing up and living with the Aborigines in Australia. And he's also PhD, so he's also studied many other cultures and indigenous perspectives. And he says that it's not the case when you actually hang out and live this indigenous-based life, the life of our ancestors for 99% of humans species history. They do not live in fear and with a danger signal going across their lens of motivating and what they look for and make sure that they don't have a predator sneak up on them. No. And he puts it very simply. He says, you can't spend any time with them. Those who live the old ways, the ancient ways of total collaborative, distributed mind that they live by, rather than our cut off, very narrow mind with this fear projection. When I say us, I mean the modernized, technologized, domesticated humans, not our best condition. The distributed mind, or this open mind, is a mind that is connected and flows in a primal awareness, as 4 as my other indigenous colleague speaks. The distributed mind moves and works in the intelligence of all the systems going on. So Yunkaporta says, no, he says, they don't live in fight, flight, just waiting to be triggered. That's not how they survive. They survive in this relationship to everything. And in the relationship to everything, they watch, listen, learn from that environment, from the land, so to speak. And the conclusion is, for him, and I have to agree, it's a very compelling argument, is that they already know where all the predators are. They're not guessing where the predators are. They're not thinking, oh, I wonder if they're there. I wonder if they're behind that. Wonder if they're... No. It says that's not how they read their environment. Their environment is constantly read in this very subtle, as I say, distributed mind that's very holistic. And they can tell by flowers in bloom, the weather, the time of the year, all kinds of ways that for us domesticated humans living in our boxes, we can hardly even imagine the amount of intelligence that these peoples on the land are living and taking in through their skin and all their senses. They are so connected. And so they know where the predators are, is what he says. They don't have to worry about them. And then he says, and that connection that's been built over such a long period of their coevolution with predators, just for example, but it's all the creatures that are communicating that they're in relationship with, that those humans are completely part of the system. They have a relationship with the predators, and the predators that he says, they don't eat them as a general principle or general rule. And he says, we've been given this story, again, constructed through the domesticated fear projection of modern domesticated humans and our fear of nature, our fear of being out of control. And that's all the argument I have on the video. It's one that I just wanted to introduce you in the short video. The fight flight response is bullshit as being the center of the human experience of survival. And so then that raises the question at the end of the video is, okay, so if that fear is not the central motivator, and built on this survival systems reflex so-called reptilian brain, there's all kinds of stories about, how powerful it is. And again, I'm not saying none of that exists. I'm saying there are good evidence that there are those patterns, those kinds of mechanisms for defense. Absolutely. Good defense intelligence. But it really raises the question if it is bullshit, as it certainly seems to be, as a fear projection onto the past from our fear, that what would a fearlessness perspective respond to in seeing this story of human existence in our earliest primal ancestors, not only of our species, but of all organisms going way back, even to the non-carbon based organisms that live in what we call, moderns call non-life, but of course you could easily argue that they are just life of another kind, non-carbon based. But all that intelligence of their design and their motivations, in a way, what if it's actually not based on fear? And again, I'm questioning what would happen if it's not. Then what happens to fearlessness as a concept, as a strategic theory or philosophy, as I've been using? Well, it makes me kind of question it. Makes me kind of question even my own thinking about fearlessness. So, yeah, 33 years of studying fear and fearlessness, and I'm sitting here now, questioning. Yeah, I'm trying to get around the fear projection for sure with fearlessness, but I'm also starting to see, there's probably a skew in there that I still haven't figured out or experienced enough. And so kudos to the teaching of Tyson Yunkaporta in the last decade or so, as he's been helping to mediate the teachings from the elders that he has learned from, and his living experience on the land, the Aboriginal peoples that he speaks about. Again, I don't know all the details of his life and story in his book, but my wife and I are reading it right now, off and on, and interested of the impact that he has now, also living as a modern Western and PhD and scholar in his own right, how he's attempting to interpret. So that's what I wanted to share today. I think you'll have lots there to think about for the next few days. Bye bye.